Good afternoon, viewers. We're coming to you from the UWI Press, and I have with me Professor Obika Gray. I am Martin Henry, and we plan to share half an hour of interview time discussing one of his significant pieces of work. Professor Gray, before I get into this monumental piece of scholarship as I describe it, could you give us a little grounding on yourself? We know you're Jamaica born, but after that, what?
Yeah, I was born in Jamaica, actually on Rum Lane, and moved uptown and lived with an aunt who raised me and her family. We migrated to the United States in 1967, and I've been living in the United States since that time, but with regular trips back home. And my scholarship focused on Latin America and the Caribbean.
And living abroad, has it affected your accent at all? Professor Gray is the author of Demeaned But Empowered, The Social Power of the Urban Poor in Jamaica, a 2004 title published by the UWI Press. What brought you to this study, Professor?
I'm interested in the relationship between power and culture, and I noticed that that there was a cultural foundation for power in this society and in this region. And I also noticed the extent to which the powerless were participating in public life in a way that we don't see in other places.
Yeah. And so you took on this study looking at politics, power, and the poor in urban Jamaica. The title of the book is that they are demeaned, the power of the urban poor, but they're also powerful. It looks to me like a contradiction of terms. Could you unpack the thesis of the book for us? Why demeaned but empowered?
Yeah, the urban poor, because of their color, because of their language, because of their lack of education, have become demeaned in our society because of the associated with the legacy of slavery.
Yeah.
So in that respect, they have been seen as pariahs in the society. And so that is the sense in which they are demeaned. And we know the history of colonialism in this country as it pertains to blacks, unlettered blacks in particular. But they are also empowered because our political actors and our political system has mobilized them politically, brought them into the political game for the reasons we know, and gave them a modicum of power.
Yeah. You have described the Jamaican politics in one place as dirty politics. And you were regaled with stories about the dirty politics of the Jamaica Labour Party and the PNP, the People's National Party. We use the phrase on the streets as well, but from a scholarly perspective, what did you mean by dirty politics?
Yeah, it's a politics of no holds barred. Anything is possible in the fight for power. And so if that means everything from stone throwing, firing guns, giving political supporters state largesse, and even disrupting others' political campaign, that's what we understand as dirty politics in Jamaica.
And you unearthed stories which substantiated that position.
Yes.
I think, a key concept in your book, Demeaned But Empowered, The Social Power of the Urban Poor in Jamaica, is the concept of badness-honor, which I don't think I've seen elsewhere in any scholarly work or even in press publications. What's the concept about?
Yeah, we're familiar with the term badness, chucking badness.
We understand, yes.
Yeah, we understand that. But I wanted to have a couplet of badness and honor. Why are people acting defiantly and in a form of outlawry? I argue that it is a form of regaining honor in a society where you're dishonored.
Yeah.
And so that's my thesis, that badness has to be understood as outlawry, but it also has to be understood as a form of compensatory honor.
And you're familiar with the term disrespect.
Right.
Which seemed to flow naturally from the concept of badness-honor.
Yes.
And quite a bit of crime in Jamaica is driven by responses to being disrespectful in the dis. So has anybody else picked up on this concept in the scholarly literature? Can't say I've seen it elsewhere.
Yeah, I haven't seen the use of it, but I must say that the University of Binghamton, the Broaddale Center, is having me visit them in April to talk about one of the chapters that I wrote in this book. And the Broaddale Center is a major intellectual center in.
Right, and based as you are in the United States, have you seen badness-honor in American society in any other capacity?
Yes, the gangsterism in the ghetto, the culture of hip hop has a similar features to our dance hall culture, where the celebration of badness and thuggery and swaggering manhood is also celebrated there. So it would apply to industrial societies as well as our own.
You're seeing signs of that?
Yes.
I noted your regard for Carl Stone's work.
Yes.
Although you have criticized elements of it.
Yes.
Stone wrote about political clientelism quite extensively, and you've borrowed the phrase as well. What's your interpretation of political clientelism, and how did it play out in the Jamaican scenario that you documented in the book we're reviewing?
Right. Yes, I owe a lot of intellectual debt to the late Professor Stone, because he stimulated my intellectual interest in this area of the relationship between power and culture. I wanted to go beyond his path-breaking work to elaborate a little more on how power is exercised in Jamaica, not only by clientelism, but by predation, what I call predation politics, which is the politics of drawing on the popular culture to maintain your power. And when that popular culture gets out of line, you crush it, you repress it.
And does this reflect Stone's view of clientelism, or have you taken slightly different views on it?
Yes, I've taken it further, I think, by talking about the dual face of power in Jamaica, which is, on the one side, it solicits and coddles the poor and promotes them and mobilizes them for political gain. But if they, as a result, become more uppity and more challenging, they're repressed as cruelly as any other force in the country that threatens power here.
So power protects itself?
Yes.
At the expense of the poor?
Yes. Even as it mobilizes the poor.
It looks to me like a contradictory relationship, tension. How has that tension been resolved in Jamaican politics?
I don't think it has been resolved. The political leadership and the political class is trying to figure out how to move beyond the downside of clientelism by rejecting the gunmen and their association with political gunmen, by divorcing, saying lip service that they're divorcing themselves from that kind of affiliation. But we get the contradictions of any transition, where one hand is saying one thing, the other hand is saying something else.
And that remains a contradiction in Jamaican society.
Yes.
Contrary to many other commentators who see the poor as being victims and oppressed, you have seen them as being empowered to a certain degree. How do you reconcile this difference of views between simply being victims oppressed and people empowered to act in their own sphere?
Yeah. In developing societies like our own, the state doesn't have the vast apparatus to dominate society as thoroughly as they do in industrial societies. And so there's a lot of openings for powerless groups to influence power. And when the powerful actually solicits the efforts of the poor in their statecraft and political agenda, then the powerful can exert a modicum of power. Not overwhelming, but a modicum of power, which matters.
Right, and is that element of power, which is the basic thesis of your book?
Yes.
Demeaned But Empowered.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the parasitic side of state power, which you described. I've never quite heard it in those terms, that the state as a parasite. Actually, it presents itself in Jamaica as being a benefactor to the poor and to other sectors. But you have described it as a parasitic state in the exercise of power.
Yes. Most rulers and powerful agents in the world do not rely on powerless groups to authorize their power. They don't rely on disenfranchised groups to do that. They rule without any bowing to the lower classes. We have this strange situation in Jamaica where the lower classes matter a great deal to the life of power. And the parasitism comes in where the power holders draw on the popular culture of the people, their language, their music, their personalities, their heroic figures and the like.
Yes. And I noticed you described quite a bit of that in the political campaigns, the street meetings and the religious music, the folk music and otherwise. Did you actually see any of this in your childhood?
Yes.
Did you attend meetings?
I saw political meetings in my as a youth. And I, of course, read about it widely, and I watched the political actors on the stage. So I lived some of what I was talking about. And of course, because I have family who are working class members, I visit those precincts.
You did as well?
Yeah.
I noticed in the political history of Jamaica, these are contests for power between the political parties and the urban poor. Would be, to a large extent, taking place in Kingston, Lower St. Andrew. But strangely enough, several of Jamaica's prime ministers have emerged from exactly the same constituencies. Michael Manley out of Central Kingston, Edward Siaga out of Western Kingston, Portia Simpson Miller now celebrating 40 years out of Southwest St. Andrew, and for a brief stint, Bruce Golding back in Western Kingston. Why would this zone of contest be the primary area for top leadership to emerge?
Well,
is it accidental or is it a cause and effect relationship?
Well, we live in a world where urban life and city life dominates. And it's very unusual in the modern world for rural populations, rural leaders to come to the fore in modern societies. And so the consequence is that the telecommunication system, the media, and of course the vivid character of urban life tend to promote urban actors and put them up for political power.
Probing a little more deeply, was badness a factor in the rise to power, this association with a power base among the urban poor?
Yes, absolutely. The leaders mirror the badness among the people, and the people celebrate that as a kind of this mark of distinction, that our leaders look like us, sound like us, act like us. We're going to support them no matter what.
And even when there was a color differential,
oh, absolutely,
people still felt that they were honorary one of us.
Right, and we have the Bustamante experience to confirm it. It's not a recent phenomenon. Yeah. Bustamante from 38, right? Yes. We could understand his leadership as a form of badness against empire, right?
That's an interesting interpretation.
Yes.
Perhaps Bustamante would agree, because he did stand up very vigorously against the British Empire.
Yes.
But Obika, let's talk a little bit about your concept of class. You've used the term both in this interview and in your book. Stone felt that class was a continuum, as opposed to the Marxist view of three sharp distinctions, upper class, middle class, lower class. What's your view on class in general, but class structure in Jamaica in particular?
I think the Marxist interpretation still has a lot of validity in terms of social divisions and the division of labor.
Yeah.
So as far as the division of labor goes, it's a useful concept. However, because of our undeveloped character of our economy and the fragmentation of our classes, those clean lines between bourgeoisie, proletariat, peasantry simply don't exist in our setting.
What exists?
We have overlapping strata. We have different strata that are overlapping, so that people may belong to several classes in the traditional Marxist sense, right? Because of the nature of our undeveloped economy. So somebody might be part-time peasant, but also that same person might be an entrepreneur, an independent entrepreneur, and so on down the line.
Right. You mentioned moral culture several times in the text. Chapter 4, exilic space, moral culture and social identity in the ghetto. Chapter 7, crime, politics and moral culture. In a book about politics and power, about the lower class and their power bases, I find it intriguing that you've picked up the subject of moral culture.
Yes.
What did you have there in the text?
I'm moving towards the view that culture is vitally important to development, and moral culture in particular. And by moral culture, I'm referring to one's sense of what is right, what is wrong, one sense of possibilities, one sense of hope, one sense of how one should behave towards one's neighbors, towards one's kin, towards people who are different.
Yeah.
And so to the extent that moral culture, our moral culture, becomes harmful and destructive in those ways where violence and hostility and aggression become the dominant expression of our moral culture, we're in trouble.
Was the politics capitalizing on the moral culture it found, or did it create this dysfunctional moral culture?
It intensified attributes that were already there but did not have the destructive effects. For example, youth gangs. Mm-hmm. Youth gangs were fighting before the parties got themselves involved, right? Yeah. And it was just a fight for turf. But harnessing that kind of violence for political purposes had the destructive effects which we now live through. So those attributes were there, contestation among young youth, mm-hmm. but now it was put to political purpose with disastrous effects.
Chapter 2 talks about the faithful alliance. And you trace this back to almost the foundation of the political parties, that very soon after inception, they became aligned with criminal violence, political violence. Could you elaborate on this faithful alliance, how it came to be and what effects it had both on the politics and on the urban poor?
Yes. In the struggle for power, our parties relied on thugs, let's call them that, to intimidate the political opposition. And this is known in all political systems. It's not unusual to us. Our distinction is that we institutionalized that relationship between thugs and the state, whereas in other settings, the thugs are shed. Their presence is shed within the parties, and they're done with, and power takes its own trail. But in our settings, the thuggery, now mutating into gangs, armed gangs and armed political gangs, becomes institutionalized, and that's where we found ourselves in great difficulty.
Which perhaps takes us to the next point which I want to discuss with you. That institutionalization, how deep has it been and how long lasting? Is it still with us?
It's fading now, okay, because of the high costs that it has produced. The high costs in violence, the high costs in governance, the high costs in crime, and of course the destructive effect on moral culture and on